In some ways, Samson reminds me a little of 2025's Mind's Eye. That is, like Mind's Eye, it's regularly gorgeous, has some neat vehicles, and is intentionally narrower and far less GTA adjacent in scope than it may look like at first blush. However, also like Mind's Eye, Samson is pretty bad. With extremely janky combat, predictable car chases, and a small pool of constantly repeating missions, this open-world driving brawler hybrid became a dull and annoying slog long before I reached the end of my 12-hour stint with it. Worse, even though I've cleared the mammoth $100,000 debt that drives Samson's daily grind of crime, a game-breaking bug has left me soft-locked out of actually finishing the main missions and rolling credits. It's as if this game doesn't want me to finish it properly any more than I do. Samson's setup is simple. You are ex-con Samson McRae, who's recently returned to his neighbourhood of Tyndallston. It's the 1990s, but disappointingly, the choice of time period has virtually no impact besides forcing McRae to use payphones.
Talk to me.
There's certainly no 90s music on the car radios. In fact, there's no car radio at all, so there isn't even anywhere players could potentially dump their own. McRae has a $100,000 debt being held over his head by an out-of-town crew using his sister as leverage and must make daily repayments to keep them both alive in the long term.
You owe a lot of money.
Tell me something I don't know.
Parallel to this, there are 14 story missions involving some criminal rivals of McRae and his Tyndallston pals, of which Samson served me up 7 before getting gummed up by some kind of bug that has prevented me from seeing the rest. There's a finite amount of jobs you can take on per day, and the sense of urgency and pressure this places on your actions is quite compelling for a brief time, before I grew weary with the general sloppiness of the brawling, the bugs, and the overall repetitiveness of the missions themselves. Chipping away at the huge sum was an admittedly compulsive loop. Each day is broken up into 3 sections, afternoon, evening, and night, and you initially have 6 action points to devote to taking on missions that typically cost 2 or 3 apiece. You must complete jobs to scrape together enough cash to service your debt every single day, and if you come up short, you'll be greeted by hired goons paid to pound it out of you the next morning.
Put him down!
Allow me to note that I'm well aware Samson is not exactly a big budget game, and on the Venn diagram of open world action driving games that operate on the fringe of Grand Theft Auto's turf, there admittedly isn't exactly a ton of crossover. At its core, Samson is really a straightforward open world brawler with a basic driving component, and that's it. And that's fine. But its narrow scope isn't its problem. The problem is how drastically unfinished and unrefined it all is. Make no mistake, Samson is regularly very good looking. From the way the midday sun pierces into McRae's crumbling apartment, to the wafting steam emanating from manholes on the rain-slick streets, Samson's visuals have truly been wonderfully realised. Tyndallston itself is also a genuinely fascinating place to inspect, thanks to its remarkable level of detail. The world is better described as more of a single neighbourhood rather than a city on account of its small size, with the main part of town just a few blocks wide and flanked by 2 waterside industrial zones, plus there's a thin strip of freeway across a river accessible via several bridges. However, keeping it small has clearly allowed developer Liquid Swords to dress it with layers upon layers of credible urban grime. From the piles of garbage and stripped-down cars to the splashes of unique graffiti and hastily scrawled slogans, Tyndallston feels lived in a way not all open-world games manage. Unfortunately, Samson's admirable aesthetics can't counteract the shonkiness of its combat, the dullness of its driving, or the dreariness of having to do the same missions over and over for no measurable payoff. Samson's strictly hand-to-hand brawling is clunky and graceless, and there's no firearm combat at all, which begs the question of whether this whole game might have been better off set in a different country altogether. Cops will very occasionally fire on McRae, but even they mostly forget they're armed. At one point, I killed a man surrounded by police in the forecourt of a precinct, and not one of them thought to pull a pistol. Enemies appear to have very little environmental awareness, struggling with tight spaces and doorways and getting hung up on props and clipping through parts of the world. Sometimes they just ignore your presence altogether. What's with this guy? I don't know, man. I'm sure he's just here to reverse over some other guys. Yeah, you're probably right. Oh no! With no lock-on available, fights typically devolve into spamming McRae's light attack button and swinging the camera around as you swipe at the air trying to connect with opponents. There's also a slow and highly telegraphed heavy attack that lands with a pleasing enough meaty crunch, but it's not something you can use much when surrounded by enemies. Combat isn't particularly responsive either. For instance, staggered opponents will have a prompt appear above them for a finishing move, but getting this to trigger feels inconsistent. I often found myself simply spamming the button with no result before subsequently giving up and windmilling another salvo of punches out ahead of McRae until his fists find some face flesh by accident. Extracting him from combat is even more frustrating. Mashing the dodge button is effective enough, but his ability to actually sprint away is seemingly blocked when being swarmed by thugs. That means trying to turn and slowly jog in the opposite direction will just get you punched in the back of the head a bunch. Some fights can be avoided by staying in your car, but there's a limit to what you can achieve behind the wheel. A bit of this is the result of Samson's habit of having invisible enemies drag McRae out of his vehicle and toss him several stories into the air, just far enough away that you'll automatically fail the mission. This may well be a trade-off for all the times enemies will go through the animation of yanking him out of his car without actually doing so, leaving you able to continue driving. More annoying, however, is how enemies generally have a supernatural ability to simply skate out of the way of your speeding vehicle, like animals and pedestrians in licensed racing games that aren't permitted to let you run down living beings. Unless the environment prevents it, your car will often just push enemies out of danger like identical poles of a magnet. This is not only annoying, but it looks awful and unfinished, particularly when trying to mow down large groups. For some reason, however, enemies are completely oblivious to reversing cars, so if you back towards baddies, they'll simply run mindlessly towards your rear bumper until you smear them onto the asphalt.
Oh, not good.
Unfortunately, the driving pillar of Samson's action isn't any sturdier. There are a smattering of driving-specific missions, including checkpoint races, deliveries, takedowns, and getaways, but none of them are especially enjoyable. Getaways are probably the most disappointing, since the wanted system transparently cheats to get a fix on you. Even when you've broken line of sight, if you stop, police will conveniently continue to make all the correct turns to get you.
This is 111. We've got eyes on the suspect again.
Failing that, Samson will simply spawn in a new police cruiser out of nowhere, directly behind you. Think you're safe tucked away down an alley, far from the initial pursuit? So did I, until a police car blinked into existence meters away and slammed straight into me, seconds before the cooldown timer had finished.
Die on me now, baby.
Takedowns are disappointing too. Despite Samson's trailers hinting at the prospect of thrilling crashes as enemy cars wipe out and tumble alongside you, this doesn't really happen much. What we typically get is rival vehicles bumbling around town on predefined routes. You'll know exactly when a T-bone is on the cards because after a few takedown missions, you'll know exactly where your targets are gonna turn. Occasionally, they'll get hung up for no apparent reason and refuse to proceed, giving you an easy target to smash into.
Got you now.
However, sometimes that takes too long, and the moment you wreck that car, the other vehicles are too far away and you'll instantly fail.
Lost them
Other times, your own car won't survive long enough, meaning you'll have to hoof it to the closest parked one. Samson bafflingly doesn't let you carjack vehicles with drivers in them already. If you're lucky, there'll be one close by. If you're not, you'll be running for a while. Takedown missions often end the millisecond you cause enough damage to your final target. At that point, the action will freeze to congratulate you on your success, but the moment play resumes, the target car will disappear off the face of the planet. Sometimes all the cars in the area will disappear.
These are my streets.
Much like the 2015 Mad Max game's magnum opus, there's an overt attempt in Samson to have players become attached to McRae's personal vehicle. It's perhaps not a coincidence considering there's a good deal of talent at Liquid Swords who formerly worked at Mad Max developer Avalanche, and as a total car dork, it's something I fundamentally understand. In practice, however, it just doesn't work. The cost of repairing McRae's car is roughly as much as a typical mission will pay out, so the requirement to constantly do so in order to keep using it is too big a burden, and an unnecessary one at that. I quickly pivoted to using stolen cars to complete missions. Aside from mild variations, excluding McRae's one-of-a-kind muscle car, I think there are only about 4 different traffic cars in Samson. That's really very low for the genre. However, with the exception of a few checkpoint races with particularly unforgiving time limits that I quickly learned to avoid, I eventually found I could reliably complete missions in any one of them. I took down the same street racer on several occasions in an old Ford Econoline style van, and at one point I disabled a whole 4-car convoy in a boxy old off-brand Chevy Caprice. The 90s European and Crown Vic inspired sedans don't feel appreciably slower than McRae's car, and I completed plenty of checkpoint races in them. I see what Liquid Swords was trying to do, but it pushed me away from McRae's car rather than increasing my desire to nurture it.
Oh yeah, that's the feeling right there.
There's a whole XP system with perks and upgrades, but none of them feel meaningful. They largely just increase attributes like health and power and such, which means little when enemies get similarly stronger alongside you. Reaching the end of my loan repayments only took me halfway through the XP levels, so I can't really say if you'll eventually outpace your enemies if you level up all the way. That said, there's simply no good case to keep playing Samson after hitting that point. Clearing the debt got me a giddy phone call from McRae's sister Una, and that's it.
We did it, Sam! You did it!
From that point on, it's noted McRae can keep what he earns, but there's no purpose to have cash on hand other than to afford car repairs, and I have no desire to keep playing the same recycled missions I've already completed 3 or 4 times each.
You there?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm just,
If you want an open-world brawler with a little drama baked around it, play Sleeping Dogs, where the hand-to-hand combat drastically outclasses Samson in every way. If you want satisfying car chases in hefty American land yachts, play Driver San Francisco. If you want an open-world driving game designed to foster a relationship with a single vehicle that simultaneously showcases the best of what a core part of the Liquid Swords team is capable of, play Mad Max. And if you want an open-world crime epic that actually feels like it's set in the 90s, just dust off a copy of GTA San Andreas. Samson has all the components of a game I should love. It boasts a gorgeously realised and impressively atmospheric open world jammed full of bespoke detail, an authentically grimy 90s noir setting, and a deep enough respect for its 3D action driving roots that I'm reasonably convinced they named a bridge after the main character of Driver. On top of that, it's been assembled by veterans of the best game released on September 1, 2015. Unfortunately, Samson just doesn't work. Broadly, it doesn't work because of its litany of bugs and glitches, its wasted 90s setting, and its format of repeating jobs that rapidly becomes tedious and unsurprising. More specifically, however, Samson doesn't work because it's literally broken, since it also stopped serving me story missions halfway through and left me marooned in a softlock save file I can't actually finish, despite updates this week coming with apparent fixes for various progression blockers players are suffering. Samson may come stocked with an impressively detailed sandbox, but it's totally impossible to recommend in its current state. For more recent verdicts, check out our reviews for Replaced and Mouse PI for Hire. For everything else, stick with IGN.
oh, not good. You piece of